Instead of existing to defend the country, U.S. troops exist to serve as the President's personal attack force, ready to obey his latest command to deploy to any country for any reason. Yet, after the historical record has been laid bare, some people just don't get it. After the United States invaded Mexico under false pretenses, after we helped to overthrow the existing monarchy in Hawaii, after we seized Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam from Spain during the Spanish-American War, after the United States intervened militarily in Nicaragua, Panama, Honduras, the Dominican Republic, Korea, Cuba, China, and Mexico before World War I, after we sent troops to Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Russia, Panama, Honduras, Yugoslavia, Guatemala, Turkey, and China between the world wars, after we engaged in 100 additional military actions following World War II, after all this, some people still can't see, or perhaps don't want to see, the insidious nature of U.S. foreign policy. Writing in the Weekly Standard in 2001, soon after the September 11th attacks, neoconservative CFR senior fellow Max Boot maintained that rather than the attack being a payback for American imperialism, it was a result of insufficient American involvement and ambition. The solution is to be more expansive in our goals and more assertive in their implementation. Contrast this with the opinion of Chalmers Johnson, who has written a trilogy of books on the true nature of U.S. foreign policy. The suicidal assassins of September 11, 2001 did not attack America as political leaders and news media in the United States have tried to maintain. They attacked American foreign policy. The world doesn't hate us for our wealth, our freedoms, and our culture. It hates us for our foreign policy. Although militant Islamicists may want to convert Americans to Islam, outlaw pornography, jail homosexuals, ban alcohol, cover up women's midriffs, and clean up our decadent culture, they have consistently maintained and demonstrated that it is the U.S. presence in the Middle East, blanket support for Israel, years of aggression against Iraq, and support for corrupt Arab governments for which they are willing to resort to terrorist attacks. Terrorist attacks against the West are political in nature, not cultural or religious. Max Boot has further said that U.S. imperialism has been the greatest force for good in the world during the past century. This thinking has even pervaded the highest office in the land. Echoing the inscription on the Liberty Bell, President Bush closed his second inaugural address with the statement that America in this young century proclaims liberty throughout the world and to all the inhabitants thereof. But rather than receiving a proclamation of liberty, what many people in foreign countries receive instead are threats, bombs, and bullets. It is no wonder former U.S. Attorney General William Ramsey Clark has said that the greatest crime since World War II has been U.S. foreign policy. And Murray Rothbard, who was at once the 20th century's greatest proponent of liberty and opponent of the state, was perfectly justified in saying that empirically, taking the 20th century as a whole, the single most warlike, most interventionist, most imperialist government has been the United States. From a Christian perspective, there's only one way to describe U.S. foreign policy. It is evil. It was evil before the United States invaded Iraq, and it would still be evil if the United States withdrew all its forces from Iraq tomorrow. It is because of our foreign policy that the U.S. military has become, through its wars, interventions, and occupations, the greatest force for evil in the world. U.S. foreign policy sows discord among nations, stirs up strife where none existed, intensifies the hatred that many foreigners around the world have for Americans and each other, and creates terrorists faster than we can kill them. The United States has pressured, destabilized, undermined, manipulated, and overthrown governments, including democracies. We have assassinated or attempted to assassinate foreign leaders. We have destroyed industry, culture, and infrastructure. We have helped install autocrats and dictators. We have sponsored regime changes in countries that no longer favored U.S. corporate interests. We have backed and engineered military coups. We have been involved with torturers, death squads, drug traffickers, and other unsavory persons. We have allied ourselves with murderous regimes. We have downplayed massive numbers of civilian casualties by dismissing them as collateral damage. We have labeled violence perpetrated by our opponents as terrorism, atrocities, ethnic cleansing, and genocide, while minimizing or defending the same actions committed by the United States or its allies. We have engaged in thousands of covert actions. We have undertaken massive propaganda campaigns to deceive foreigners about their own country. We have kidnapped foreign citizens in their own country. We have transported insurgents and detainees to torture-friendly countries. We have looted and confiscated government documents from foreign countries. We have selectively intervened in countries for dubious humanitarian concerns while ignoring real suffering and death in other countries. We have used humanitarian interventions as a guise for imperialism. We have encouraged favored governments to engage in human rights violations. We have supported corrupt and tyrannical governments. We have crushed populist and nationalist governments or movements struggling against tyrannical governments. We have trained foreign soldiers and police to suppress their own people. We have influenced, sabotaged, financed, and otherwise interfered with elections in other countries. We have taken sides or intervened in civil wars. We have recklessly tested and knowingly used chemical and biological weapons on both U.S. citizens and foreigners in their countries. We have encouraged the use of chemical and biological weapons by other nations and trained foreign nationals to do the same. We have downplayed the slaughter of civilians killed in civil wars if they were on the side we didn't agree with. We have provided military hardware to and trained the paramilitary forces of foreign countries. We have engaged in provocative naval actions in international waters under the guise of protecting freedom of navigation. We have bribed, blackmailed, and bullied our way around the world. Say what you will, believe what you will about the nuclear programs of Iran and North Korea. The fact remains that the United States is the only country to have ever used nuclear weapons on people, and we did it twice. The United States is an overextended, out-of-control rogue nation. Yet the mere mention of the evil that the United States has perpetrated throughout the world upsets and angers many Americans because they have the mindset that a terrorist is someone who detonates a bomb but doesn't wear an Air Force uniform. But because we live in an imperfect world of nation-states that is not likely to change any time in the near future, the question of U.S. foreign policy cannot be ignored. Randolph Burns' observation almost 100 years ago that war is the health of the state has never been more relevant than right now. Those who disparage the welfare state while turning a blind eye to the warfare state are terribly inconsistent. There is an intimate connection between foreign policy and domestic policy, as I will point out in my conclusion. If there's any religion that should be opposed to the evils of war, it is Christianity. And if there's any group of people in America that should be opposed to a militaristic foreign policy, it is Christians. Yet in the church will be found some of the greatest supporters of the state, its president, its military, and its wars. The question before us then is, what should the church be saying about war and foreign policy? Before answering that question, I would like to point out not only what things the church is saying now about war and foreign policy, but why I believe these things are being said. So what is the church saying now about war and foreign policy? Unfortunately, the church is either saying things that are wrong or is not saying enough about what is wrong. In the church's conservative, evangelical, and fundamentalist circles,